Thank you want someone.
Hope he doesn't want to stop. Love it.
Call the meeting to order. Morning. I am delighted to welcome everyone to the Colwell Center this morning for our first meeting for FY 25-26, the school year. This is the first board meeting in this beautiful multi-purpose building comprised of research and learning labs, startups, and the chancellor's headquarters. We've had a special board meeting here where we focus solely on the meeting at hand, but never take the opportunity to see the research and programs that operate in the Institute of Marine and Environmental Technology. Last night, we had the honor of touring the facility and meeting with some of the Institute's researchers. As a partnership across the universities, UMBC, UMB, and UMSI's, and with TU's STEM lab, it is truly an institutional gem of the system. UMSI's president, Morales Wilhelm, will give a formal welcome in a moment, so I won't steal any more of his thunder. I just wanted to say that it's great to be here. Let's give also a big welcome to Druvak Mahari, who began his 2 years of service. Raise your hand, Drew. His 2 years of service as student regent on July 1st. And he certainly started out with a bang. He was featured as a guest columnist in the Baltimore Sun on that very day as author of a piece examining how universities can regain the public trust. I look forward to working with him. I also want to acknowledge and thank Hugh Bresson, who was elected to serve in a new role as Assistant Secretary on July 31st. Raise your hand, Hugh. Regent Breslin has been a thoughtful and engaged colleague and is a valued addition to the board's leadership. Before moving forward with the agenda, I want to note that earlier this morning, Chancellor Perman and I had the pleasure of presenting the 2024 USM Regents Staff Awards. If our award recipients are in the room, please stand to be recognized. We recognize 9 staff members across 5 categories: exceptional contributions to the institution, outstanding service to students, extraordinary public service, effectiveness and efficiency, inclusion, multiculturalism, and social justice. Again, congratulations on this achievement, and thank you for your exemplary contributions. Following the period of public comment, we will hear from UMSI's president, Morales Wilhelm. This is the first board meeting both as president and as host. So we're starting him out very quickly. So please be gentle. The board education forum will follow, and then Chancellor Perman and will give his report, as will the chairs of the council. And so it's now time for public comment. Ms. Wilkerson, will you moderate the public session?
Madam Chair, we do not have anyone signed up for public comment. Thank you.
Thank you. As part of the board meeting, we host an education forum to offer a deep dive into an area related to board governance. and system operations. In April, we invited Title IX expert and attorney Janet Judge to hold a 2-hour education forum to review sexual misconduct under Title IX. The next day, Title IX regulations were subsequently revised. Today's education forum will update the board on the revisions to the regulations. Janet Judge is with us today. Welcome back, Ms. Judge.
Thank you. One thing that you can always count on is when I do a presentation, the law will change within a matter of days. And that's what happened last time I was here. And we've had new regulations that have been finalized and implemented and challenged. So we'll talk about those regulations today. We'll begin by just talking about Title IX and reminding everybody about the law. It's just a federal law that prohibits discrimination based on sex, including sexual harassment and violence, relationship violence and stalking in any education program or activity in a federally funded school. If it jeopardizes that person's equal access to education. Title IX also prohibits discrimination against pregnant and parenting students. For purposes of today's presentation, we will focus on those provisions of the new regulations that apply in the higher education context, so colleges and universities. And although it applies broadly to sex discrimination, and I'll talk about that a little bit, we will be concentrating on sex-based harassment provisions. So since I was here last, it's a bit complicated, right? We have had multiple states file challenges to the regulations on a variety of grounds. We have had those challenges go all the way up to the Supreme Court, where it was the Department of Education asked the Supreme Court to please vacate an injunction in place that prohibited certain states and certain individuals from implementing the Title IX regulations. The Supreme Court denied that injunction. And although it had been reported in a way that made some people believe that the regulations in full had been struck down, that's not what the Supreme Court said. Rather, the Supreme Court said that the challenges that had been raised around these regulations by particular groups and states were challenges that they believed were viable challenges and that should be addressed. So they refused to deny a stay of the injunctive relief. We don't have a Supreme Court opinion on the merits of those particular claims yet, but we do live in a time right now where we have a number of states that are operating under the 2020 regulations and a number of states like Maryland that are operating under the new 2024 regulations. Here's sort of a map that gives you a little bit of an idea where we are. This is not a political map, so I used blue and then thought better of it later, but I apologize for that. The blue states in this particular map are those states that have an injunction in place. We also have an interesting injunction in place that was filed by the Moms for Liberty that actually applies to individuals who are related to the Moms for Liberty wherever they may go to school, also complicating particular schools' ability to implement their policies in states where there are not statewide injunctions. All by way of saying, again, and I'll say it throughout the presentation, be nice to Title IX coordinators. They have a very difficult job, and it keeps on getting more difficult as we move forward. So let's talk about the coverage. Title IX applies to all sex discrimination occurring under a school's education program or activity in the United States, including but not limited to the following categories. Now, some of the things in red that you will see through this presentation, these are new provisions that came forth in the 2024 regulation. It applies to conduct that occurs in a building owned or controlled by a student organization that's officially recognized by a college or university. Conduct that is subject to the school's disciplinary authority. So this is a broader scope than we had in the 2020 regulations. And conduct that occurred outside the school's education program or activity or even outside the United States, notwithstanding the definition under Title IX, if that conduct contributes to sex-based hostile environment in the school's education program or activity. Now, when you're thinking about sex-based discrimination or just sex discrimination more broadly, one of the major changes between the 2024 regs and the 2020 regs was the 2024 regs apply to sex discrimination across an institution's campus, not just sexual harassment or sexual violence. So if you're thinking about this, you would think these regulations in certain part apply to, for example, equitable athletic opportunities and other sex discrimination that is not sex-based harassment. So what is some of the controversy around these regulations? It's around the scope of the regulations. These regs say that sex-based discrimination includes discrimination based on sex stereotypes, sex characteristics, pregnancy or related conditions, sexual orientation, and gender identity. Gender identity is the one term that really sort of was the impetus for a lot of the legislation challenges, the injunctive relief that we talked about. People believe that definition goes beyond what Title IX was intended to cover, and they have said it creates a variety of challenges for them. For example, if you're in a particular state where that is not a protected classification, there's an argument that you then have a challenge between state and federal law. Questions around First Amendment, religious accommodation, and other things are all at play. So in limited circumstances, Title IX allows differing treatment or separation on the basis of sex, for example, in athletics, as we talked about before, or in housing, for example. And typically, a school may not carry out such different treatment or separation in a manner that discriminates on the basis of sex. And in these regulations in particular, they added more than de minimis harm. So what is de minimis harm? They provided the following example: adopting a policy or engaging in a practice that prevents a person from participating in an education program or activity consistent with that person's gender identity subjects a person to more than de minimis harm on the basis of sex. Well, you did note that the government did not finalize the regulations with regard to trans athlete participation and other issues with respect to transgender individuals. And in these regulations, they also have included the following provision: that what I just read to you does not apply to certain Title IX exceptions, which include the athletics space, also for religiously affiliated institutions, service academies, beauty pageants, and other exceptions to the Title IX law. Now, there are designations and notifications that are part of this. They've not really changed since the last time I did the training, and in the interest of time, I've just included them in the slides so you can have them, but we won't spend time going forward. But basically, a school has to notify its community and the public that it does not discriminate on the basis of sex, and also how to get in touch with Title IX coordinator, how to file complaints, and how to find grievance procedures that the institution has set in place. Requires that these things be publicized on websites and in publications. And although Title IX was published in 1972 or passed in 1972, some of the language is a little bit formalistic and a little bit outdated. The 2024 regulations are trying to say that there are ways that you can comply with your publication requirements that don't create additional bulk and additional paper. So we'll move on to some of the definitions that are at play that are important. We have a new definition for a complainant that is particularly important for those people who are thinking about how these rules play out on campuses. Well, it's a student or employee who's alleged to have been subjected to conduct that could be sex discrimination. That's consistent with what we've had all along. But it also can be a person other than a student or employee who's alleged to have been subjected to conduct that could constitute sex discrimination and who was participating or attempting to participate in the school's education program or activity at the time the alleged sex discrimination occurred. So, for example, and if you look at my bio, you'll know that you're going to get some athletics examples as we go through. For example, a visiting athletics team who believes that the accommodations or the way that they've been treated on campus was not equitable. Respondent is consistent. It's the person who's alleged to have violated the policies of the institution. Another very, very significant change is that complaints no longer need to be formal. You may remember under the 2020 regulations, in order for a case to move forward, there had to be a signed complaint. It either had to be signed by the complainant or by the Title IX coordinator who had determined whether or not a complainant decided to move forward, that there was significant harm that could occur on campus, so they wanted to move forward with the complaint, even if the complainant would not participate. That's no longer the case. Complaints can be oral or written if they are reasonably understood to be a person asking for a school to look into a case of sex discrimination. Now, not only that, but you have to keep a record of all of those complaints. Now, you can imagine what a task that would be, and schools are working very hard to make sure they're able to keep that kind of documentation in the way that the government is expecting it. Moreover, those complaints can come into any one of your employees. So your employees are going to have that obligation to be making those documentation, and it's going to be quite interesting to see how schools are going to be able to implement this standard. Complaints may be made by a complainant, a parent, guardian, or other authorized legal representative, or by the Title IX coordinator, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Now, there are two main areas of sex-based harassment that the regulations look to address. There are sex-based harassment that you've heard of if you've gone through training throughout your time. One is quid pro quo, and the other is hostile environment harassment. But there are changes in the definition of the quid pro quo definition. An employee, agent, or other person authorized by the recipient to provide an aid, benefit, or service under the recipient's education program or activity, where they explicitly or implicitly or impliedly condition provision of aid, benefit, or service on participation in unwelcome sexual conduct, that is quid pro quo misconduct. That is a broadening of the standard. And so you can think of all the different ways that schools work with individuals that are not employed by the institution. You can think about it in the food services industry or very many other areas, and this is what it is intended to address. Hostile environment harassment. There's been some tweaks on the hostile environment harassment. So we had one standard that was changed in the 2020 regulations, and now it's been effectively changed back in the 2024 regulations. In essence, unwelcome sex-based conduct that is based on the totality of circumstances and is subjectively and is the critical point. It used to be or, subjectively and objectively offensive, and is so severe or pervasive, or instead of and there, that it limits or denies a person's ability to participate in or benefit from the school's education program or activity. In other words, conduct that creates a hostile environment that is so significant that it negatively impacts your ability to participate in the education program. I'd imagine everybody in this room has been subject to a hostile environment in one way or the other, but for these purposes, we're talking about on the basis of sex. It also includes sexual assault as defined by the Clery Act, and dating violence, domestic violence, and stalking as defined by the Violence Against Women Act. And we went through all of those definitions the last time I was here. And again, in the interest of time, we will move through those fairly quickly. Right. It does not necessarily define consent. It basically says that it's up to schools to define and adopt a particular definition of consent where that term is applicable with respect to sex-based harassment. In Maryland, you do have provisions in the law that define what consent is, so it's important for all of the policies and procedures that are promulgated for schools in Maryland that they are looking at that particular state law definition. But again, as you might think, as people are transferring from schools, or you have visiting professors or other people who may come in, how important the training is, because the definition of consent may vary from school to school, as well as the policies and procedures that schools may be implementing. We also have dating violence. And, I think we're hard pressed during trainings to sit down. If I asked you all to sit down right now and write out a definition of what dating violence is in particular, to decide who actually is dating, what the term dating actually means at any given time, and have very interesting discussions with students as well. But the definition says who is or has been in a social relationship of a romantic or intimate nature with the victim, and where the existence of such a relationship shall be determined based on a consideration of the following factors. You're looking at the length of the relationship, the type of the relationship, and the frequency of interaction between the persons involved in the relationship. Again, once you start to digest that opinion, I would urge you to be very nice to your Title IX coordinators. Domestic violence is separate from dating violence. We're talking here about a current or former spouse or intimate partner of the victim under the family or domestic violence laws of the jurisdiction of the recipient, so here in Maryland, or a person similarly situated to a spouse of the victim is cohabiting or has cohabited with the victim, a spouse or intimate partner, shares a child in common with the victim, or commits acts against youth or adult victim who is protected from those acts under the family or domestic violence laws of the jurisdiction. Now, I know this feels like I'm sort of going into the weeds, but what I really wanted you to understand is the specificity that these schools are trying to address these policies and procedures day in and day out, so, on the fly. And right now, when we're in what's called the red zone, where we have a disproportionately high percentage of complaints of sexual misconduct. We also have stalking. Now, there was a particularly large spike in reports of stalking when the 2020 regulations came out, in particular because people started talking about stalking, what it was. I'm not sure that the behavior spiked, but I think that the knowledge that stalking was something that you could actually report and seek redress brought many people forward to talk about it. Engaging in a course of conduct directed at a specific person that would cause a reasonable person to fear for that person's safety or the safety of others, or suffer substantial emotional distress. The regulations also add retaliation as an actionable class of concerns that should be addressed by your policies and procedures, and that we all are pretty aware of what retaliation is. But this is when it's related to any report or participation in a school's policies or investigation around sexual misconduct. Now, remember, with the retaliation that I just talked about, that's not just about sexual misconduct or sexual harassment, but that goes to any sexual discrimination complaints that may come forward. Now, we've had changes in the reporting obligations as well. We have now mandatory reporting by non-confidential employees with either authority to implement corrective measures at the school or administrative leadership, teaching, or advising responsibilities. Now, again, you can think about that's two very broad categorizations, and schools are trying to wrap their hands around that, as well as the employees themselves, who may or may not believe they have those responsibilities. They're required to notify the Title IX coordinator when they receive information that they believe would reasonably constitute sexual discrimination. They also have obligations to provide information around resources around pregnancy and parenting information. And they also have to document those complaints. So all of these things are in play. All other non-confidential employees have to notify the Title IX coordinator when in receipt of information, or provide the Title IX coordinator's contact information about how to make a complaint to the person who has come forward to them. And then we still have confidential employee issues and sort of the thorny issues involved with designating people as confidential employees who do not have confidentiality under their licensure, meaning the school can treat them as confidential when students or others come to them with allegations of sexual misconduct. They do not need to report those forward. But if then that particular information may end up in a court, the school's designation of confidentiality does not carry any legal weight. So that becomes a difficult situation. Here in Maryland, for example, with the Justice Department involved, they determined that, hey, athletics trainers, we don't believe athletics trainers, at least in the circumstances that we looked at, are confidential employees or should be confidential employees in an athletics department. So what else is out there for schools to be able to be looking at to try and determine whether or not they have sexual misconduct concerns? Well, if people are holding like Take Back the Night events or public awareness events, and they are talking about their stories, as you've seen that have happened on campuses all over the country, schools do not have to consider those stories to be reports or complaints of sexual misconduct, but they do have to listen to what they hear about. They're not required to attend those events, but they do have to listen to the information that is shared with them, and if it creates concerns for the school, take reasonable steps to try and prevent any of the sexual misconduct that we talked about, including targeted training sessions and other preventive efforts. In addition, the Title IX coordinator has to regularly be monitoring any particular barrier that they see around the reporting of sexual misconduct and have to address those barriers, and they have to continually document their efforts in this area. So schools are expected to have prompt and effective responses to all known instances of sexual misconduct or allegations of sexual misconduct or sexual discrimination. They have to respond promptly in a manner that's deemed not to be deliberately indifferent. They have to look to their general procedures, either their just sex-based discrimination, discrimination on the basis of sex, or their sex-based harassment discrimination policies, and schools are required to have policies that address both. The particularized grievance procedures that we talk about what evidence is relevant and how you do, you question witnesses and other things, that applies to the sexual harassment provisions. It's not necessarily applicable to the general sex discrimination complaints. So when a complaint comes in, the Title IX coordinator has to assess the complaint. They don't have to start a complaint process if they determine that if all the allegations as true don't violate the school's policy. They have to contact the complainant, even if the complainant was the person who they got the information from, to offer supportive measures. They have to explain the complaint process and the informal resolution process, and provide the grievance and informal resolution procedures. Unlike the 2020 regulations, schools can now implement informal resolution even without a formal complaint, because we no longer have formal complaints. But even if a complaint is not opened for a school, they can actually address these behaviors without any sort of formal proceedings. They have to evaluate the wishes of the complainant and the safety concerns against the severity of allegations of community service safety, if a complainant decides that they do not want to go forward with the complaint. This is one of the challenges that we've seen with Title IX, where the school learns of concerning behavior, but does not have a willing complainant to work with them to move forward to determine whether or not the allegations are true and to be able to evaluate them credibly. In the absence of that, a Title IX coordinator has to listen to the complaint, to the allegations, and do some weighing about whether or not they believe that what they heard presents such a safety concern for the institution that the Title IX coordinator is going to institute a complaint on their own. Right? But they also have to be very mindful of the complainant's wish not to go forward, of any concerns they may articulate about their own safety. So they have to think about all of these different options as they're thinking about whether or not they're going to move forward on a particular complaint. But at the end of the day, the institution has an obligation to ensure that its learning environment is free from sexual misconduct and sexual discrimination to the extent it may be able to control those outcomes. If they decide to move forward, the Title IX coordinator in the school has to let the complainant know even though they didn't want it to move forward, they have to give them notice and they have to address any safety concerns that they may have with, or believe they may have with the complaint moving forward. When you have investigations of complaints, you have to provide adequate notice and supportive measures to both parties. You have to treat the parties equitably throughout the process. The school always has the burden of proof and evidence gathering. You have to provide notice to the parties and advisors of meetings and sufficient notice to understand what they are being accused of and what they may have to prepare for. And both parties get an equitable opportunity to inspect evidence. Under the new regulations, Title IX coordinators or single investigators can be the decision makers. You do not have to have a live hearing. That is another very significant change, and one that was welcomed by some of the smaller schools in particular that were facing budgetary concerns around having full investigations and hearings. Always, schools are expected to do their best to prohibit disclosures of the identities of the parties during the pendency of a grievance process to the extent they are able to do so. They can only disclose if they've obtained prior written consent, or that somebody with legal standing has waived any privacy concerns the person has, or the information is necessary to address the Title IX concerns, or some other provision that allows or requires it under law to have some disclosures. But disclosure has been a very large concern for all parties involved in these complaints. Another significant change is now schools do not have a very complicated matrix for when they must dismiss complaints and when they may dismiss complaints. The way the regulations are written, it's permissive for all dismissals. They may dismiss a complaint if they're unable to identify the respondent after taking reasonable steps. Sometimes you just hear about sexual misconduct or sex-based harassment that happens somewhere and some unnamed person, and you're not able to figure out who that may be. Or the respondent is not an employee or participating in the education program or activity. So those third-party complaints I talked about earlier, there may be instances where school will get those complaints from those visiting students or those visiting athletes and just decide you're not participating in our program, you're not enrolled in our institution, we're not going to take that complaint on. But still the school has knowledge of what the substance of that complaint was and has to consider that. The complainant voluntarily withdraws, the Title IX coordinator decides not to go forward, and then whatever is left would not constitute sexual misconduct even if proven. And after making reasonable efforts to clarify allegations with the complainant, the school decides that the allegations would not violate the school policy. Even if you implement a dismissal, so before you go through the entire process and come to any finding of responsibility or not responsible for the conduct alleged, even at that initial dismissal stage, you still have to provide written notice and reasons to the complainant and to both parties if a complaint had been opened before the dismissal was implemented. You have to provide opportunity to appeal, offer supportive measures still, whether or not a complaint goes forward, and take other appropriate steps to ensure that sex discrimination doesn't continue or recur within a program. And then you have to decide whether or not the allegations may not be sex misconduct or sexual discrimination, but do they violate any other school policy or procedure that we need to be worried about, our conduct code, for example. So I've been talking about supportive measures. Let's just talk about what those are quickly. Although there are differences in the 2024 regulations about examples of what supportive measures are, for the most part, supportive measures are things that are intended to make sure that people don't face barriers to participating in the education program during the pendency of a Title IX investigation. Schools must continue to actively work to offer supportive measures equitably to men and women, whether they are complainants or respondents within the process. And they have to be able to think about what will reasonably place an individual in a position where they are able to continue to access the education program without discrimination. These supportive measures, of course, are being implemented before there's a finding of discrimination or responsibility, so you cannot unreasonably burden either party when you're doing this. You may have no contact orders or other things. In the 2024 regulations, they suggested that there may even be one-way no contact orders, which we didn't have before. But schools are quite good about trying to figure out how to implement these, but these are incredibly important. And schools have to document not only all the substantial measures that they have put together, but any denials they have, and they have to provide basically an appeal process for denial of a supportive measure as well. Emergency removals and administrative law, this has changed as well. Important because these cases sometimes become quite high profile when schools are asking individual students to leave the education program during the pendency of an investigation. So when I'm talking about emergency removals and administrative leave, I'm talking about when a school decides to remove an individual from the education program or from campus prior to any finding of responsibility. Under the new rule, schools permitted to remove a respondent from the school's education program or activity on an emergency basis in the following situations. After it conducts an individualized safety and risk analysis, that's consistent with the 2020 regs. This is what's different. They determine that the respondent poses an imminent or serious threat to the health or safety of a complainant or any students, employees, or other persons justifying removal. The 2020 regs say that you could only have emergency removal when you found an imminent threat to the physical health or safety of anyone justifying removal. It may sound like a little bit of a tweak, but it is a large tweak for schools who are implementing emergency removals. We're talking about mental health and other harm. And then they have to determine that the threat arises from the allegations of sexual harassment, not from some other issues out there. They have to provide notice and opportunity to challenge this decision immediately following any removal, but they may remove and then have that challenge reviewed afterwards. The regulations do not prohibit individual schools from placing employees on administrative leave for the duration of the grievance process. All right, I talked earlier about informal resolution, and just a couple of quick notes and reminders, because informal resolution is a significant change. I think we're going to see a lot more use of informal resolution by schools and by students who come in and employees. You can offer it any time now prior to determining whether sex discrimination occurred, including in cases involving employees and students and involving sexual assault, et cetera, where we have had language in the past that said that was not an appropriate way to resolve those claims. Schools still have the discretion to say informal resolution is not appropriate for us generally, or it's not appropriate, we believe, for this particular case. And despite requests for resolving a case in that way, a school can say, no, I don't believe that is the appropriate way to resolve it. People who decide to go the informal resolution route get all kinds of information before they go, so they can make reasonable determinations about whether or not this is the way they want to move forward. There was some concern, and continues to be concern, about if I share a whole bunch of information in good faith during an informal resolution process, to what extent can the school then use that information later on if I pull out of the informal resolution process and go back to a formal resolution process. The regulations are acknowledging that and saying a school has to be quite frank with the participants in the informal resolution process and let them know how that information may be used. An important caveat. Now, notice of allocations is very important. You have to have a written notice of allocations to the parties. They have to know who brought the claims. They have to know what the claims are. They have to get the written notice of allegations in time to be able to prepare for any meetings or interviews around the allegations. Right? They also have to have very specific language in those notices, which are quite important because we certainly have seen how stressful it is for these students to get notice of allegations. It has to state specifically that retaliation is not permitted, that the respondent is presumed not responsible for the alleged conduct during the pendency of the grievance proceedings, and that the determination of responsibility is made only at the conclusion of the grievance process. It talks about all of the different provisions that are in place. They get access to the grievance proceedings, and they also get information about the identities of the parties who are involved and conduct allegedly resulting in the allegation of sex discrimination and the date and location of the alleged incidents. In that written notice of allegations, they also are told that they get to have an advisor present with them at any meeting or proceeding. And schools cannot limit their choice of advisors. They can have their mom or dad. They can have a lawyer. They can have their mom or dad who is also a lawyer. They can have any advisor of their choice. They also are informed that they have equal rights to I'm sorry, I'm running both the remote program and my computer. I apologize for that. They inform the parties that they have equal rights to inspect and review evidence, and that the school may delay proceedings. They may delay providing written notice if it's determined that there's a safety risk present after doing a risk analysis, a safety risk associated with providing such notice. That is a brand new provision in these regulations. So the grievance procedures are basically the same as we've seen with the new provisions that I've already outlined for you. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time going through them, but I would like to talk about complaints other than sex-based harassment just for a second. Schools are required to have procedures to evaluate sex discrimination that is not sex-based harassment. And the reporting obligations that I talked about before are around all known instances of sex discrimination, not just sex-based harassment. That is a significant shift. In the past, the reporting obligations that you received training on and you heard about was only with respect to sexual harassment, including sexual violence. So, for example, now if we have people in the athletics area, coaches or others who know there are gender equity challenges, they have an affirmative reporting obligation to report those instances forward to the Title IX coordinator. In the same way as you have any other challenges around the provision of facilities or access on campus broadly. It's important also to know that the school is supposed to take steps to protect the privacy of the parties and witnesses. I said this before, but I'm just going to say it again because it is something that comes up often and something that people raise as a concern around participation in these proceedings. This was written to try and encourage people to participate in these proceedings and also to remind schools of their obligations and what they are able to do around protecting the privacy of people who are involved in these processes. You've seen some discussion around hazing cases and other cases where you have multiple respondents, and oftentimes, unfortunately, in hazing cases, we will see allegations of sexual misconduct that would fall under the policies and procedures that we have here. Schools can consolidate complaints where there are multiple respondents or there are multiple complainants, provided all of the conduct that is a question arises out of the same set of incidents. Once they do that, though, each individual within the process has their own rights according to the regulations as we've discussed. And if there are non-Title IX allegations at play in a consolidated complaint, the Title IX processes must apply to all of the allegations that are reviewed as part of that complaint if a school chooses to consolidate complaints. The school has the burden of proof and the burden of gathering sufficient information. They have to provide an equal opportunity for the parties to present fact witnesses. They may choose to allow expert witnesses. So that has been a big point of contention in school proceedings because we're not courts of law, but it says that schools have the discretion to decide whether or not they allow expert witnesses. If they do, they have to do it for both parties. They have to provide written notice of date and time of meetings with sufficient time to prepare, as I talked about before, and they must allow for extension of timelines if appropriate, but they have to provide good reason. They do define relevance. Relevance was not defined in the prior regulations, but didn't give a whole lot of information. Just means that the allegations of sex discrimination under investigation are relevant where the evidence may aid in showing whether the alleged sex discrimination occurred and may aid a decision maker in determining whether it occurred. In this particular case, in the red, school must review all evidence gathered through the investigation and determine what evidence is relevant and what evidence is impermissible, regardless of relevance, including both inculpatory and exculpatory evidence, and ensure that the credibility must not be based on a person's status as a complainant, respondent, or witness. This goes to concerns that were raised around people who are serving in the adjudicative role, who may have written papers or other things stating a belief that that one party or the other was typically more truthful in these proceedings. So what evidence may be excluded, even if it's relevant? Evidence that's protected under a privilege and that's recognized by law, or evidence provided to a confidential employee unless that's waived by the party. A party's witness records that are made or maintained by a physician, psychologist, or other recognized professional or paraprofessional. This is a concern that was raised because there was some allegation that schools were accessing the mental health records of their students when those students were being seen in their facilities. Evidence that relates to the complainant's sexual interest or prior sexual conduct, unless offered to prove that someone other than the respondent committed the alleged conduct, or it's offered regarding the complainant's prior sexual conduct with the respondent in order to prove consent. Each party must have an equal opportunity to review, access, and respond to evidence or a written investigative report that summarizes the evidence. If the post-secondary institution provides access to an investigative report, it must provide the parties with an equal opportunity to access the evidence relied upon. If they have a live hearing as part of the grievance procedures, and again, it's not required, it must provide this opportunity to review the evidence in advance of the live hearing and to respond either before or during the live hearing at the school's discretion. So a school may offer a live hearing, but this is for sex-based harassment grievance procedures only, but it need not. They have taken a lot of procedural steps to ensure that if schools do not offer a live hearing, that there are ways to assess credibility of the witnesses, including during the investigation process, that individual parties are able to draft questions they want asked of the other party or witnesses. The investigator must ask those questions, even though the person who drafted the questions may not be in that meeting. They must record that conversation, and they must provide the conversation back to the individual party that requested that those questions be asked. In live hearings also, the school must create an audio-visual recording of the transcript of the proceedings and make it available to the parties for review and inspection, especially as it relates to any concerns around appeals. So standard of proof has always been a big issue in these proceedings. The preponderance of the evidence standard is to be used unless the school uses the clear and convincing standard in all other comparable proceedings, including proceedings relating to other discrimination complaints. And if so, then they may elect to use the higher standard for sex discrimination as well. And then once the determination is made based on all the evidence considered, the determination must be in writing. It must reference the alleged conduct. It must reference the policy provisions that were considered. It must reference the evidence that was considered and relied upon and the reasons for the determination. If there is a finding of determination, the school must come up with reasonable remedies to ensure that the complainant is placed in a position where they are able to access the education program and may impose certain disciplinary sanctions upon the respondent, although those are not prescribed by the regulations. Schools may not discipline a party, witness, or others participating in a school's grievance procedures for making false statements or for engaging in consensual sexual conduct based solely on the recipient's determination whether sexual discrimination occurred. If a school has a provision that says if you knowingly provide false information, that is a problem under our code of conduct, and we may file a complaint and follow up with that. But somebody's good faith discussion around their experience in any given case does not necessarily rise to the level of intentionally providing false information. So those are two very different things, and although we hear a lot of discussion around people providing false information. The written findings have to be provided to the parties simultaneously, addressing all of the behaviors and information and determinations I talked about before, and then also provide all of the information around the school's appeal procedures. School has to offer parties an appeal process that is at least the same as it offers in all other comparable proceedings, including proceedings related to other discrimination complaints. The grounds for appeal are the same as the 2020 regulations: procedural irregularity that affected the outcome of the matter, new evidence not reasonably available while the determination was being made, or conflict of interest of the parties who are involved in the evaluation of the allegations in the case. A school may offer additional bases provided the opportunity is offered equitably. Training is another significant change for schools, and also one that likely will be a cost center for schools as well. The training obligation has expanded dramatically under the regulations, 2024 regs. Schools must train all employees now. That's new. Title IX coordinators, investigators, decision makers, and any person who facilitates an informal resolution process also has to be trained with additional information as well. They have to be trained around what are the school's obligation, what do the grievance procedures say. If a complaint comes to you, how do you document it? What do you have to move forward and what don't you have to be moved forward? The training materials must not rely on sex stereotypes. Investigators, decision makers, and others responsible for implementing the Title IX program, of course, will have to be trained on how to do so within the law and also within the school's policies and procedures. Facilitators of informal resolution process also have to receive specialized training, although there's no licensure requirement associated with anybody who's working in that area, at least under the regulations. And then Title IX coordinators have to also receive specialized training, even though they're the ones oftentimes who are doing the training. The record-keeping requirement that I just talked to you about is there's a requirement that all those records be kept in place for 7 years and available. Also includes all training materials which schools must produce upon request. It used to be that they had to be published on your website. Now you just have to have them and produce them upon request. And then finally, I'm going to talk about the parental leave provisions, which are also new provisions. although the anti-discrimination content is probably very familiar to you. Parental status means the status of a person who, with respect to another person who is under the age of 18 or who's 18 or older but is incapable of self-care because of a physical or mental disability, is a biological, adoptive, foster, or step-parent, a legal custodian or guardian, in loco parentis with respect to the person, or actively seeking legal custody, guardianship, visitation, or adoption of such a person. I read those out in particular in the legal standard to just again remind you of how complicated this is. Think again of that last provision, actively seeking legal custody, guardianship, visitation, or adoption. Pregnancy or related conditions include pregnancy, childbirth, termination of pregnancy or lactation, medical conditions related to pregnancy, childbirth, termination of pregnancy or lactation, or recovery from pregnancy, childbirth, termination of pregnancy, lactation, or related medical conditions. In short, through these regulations, the government wanted to make clear that individuals who were in this position also received equitable access to education programs or activities. Says schools must not discriminate on any of the basis that I talked about before, or adopt or implement any policies that result in such discrimination. Now, this red part is another important new part under these regs, notification requirements for pregnancy and related conditions. Unless there's a belief that the Title IX coordinator already knows or has been notified, any employee informed of a student's condition related to pregnancy must promptly provide the Title IX contact information to that student and inform the student of Title IX's ability to prevent sex discrimination and ensure equitable access. Title IX coordinator has to inform the school of the school's obligation not to discriminate, offer voluntary reasonable modifications as necessary based on the individualized needs and consultation with the student, including leaves of absence, clean, private, unobtrusive lactation space, and other reasonable modifications. So I know that was a lot. I know that was very specific about the language, but I think it's important, especially for those who are overseeing educational institutions and spending your time so generously to do so, to understand the sorts of challenges that schools have and schools embrace to ensure that they provide a safe and fair environment for all of your students. Thank you very much for having me here today.
Janet, thank you. Thank you for that extremely informative presentation. I'll open it up now to the board or the presidents for questions.
I have a question.
Tom?
Yeah, I was curious about the safety issue and the obligations of a campus to provide security with all the gun violence. When there is a possibility for retaliation or something, does the school have an obligation to provide security?
I think that first, with respect, I think schools always have an obligation to provide safe and secure environments and to take reasonable steps when they have reason to believe that there's a concern. In the Title IX context, I think some of the most difficult cases for schools to address and some of the most difficult cases we've read about are domestic violence and dating violence cases where there's very significant violence involved. I mean, the gun piece of it, Tom, is right. Schools need to have reasonable rules and expectations, but they also have to be quite cognizant of state and federal law as well. And I think it's up to an individual school to decide what their individual policies and procedures are. We're also dealing with violence in these Title IX cases that occur right off campus, right, in other dwellings or other spaces, but may manifest itself while on campus as well.
Yes.
My question is, when a student submits a Title IX complaint, in addition to the live hearing process that you already described, what obligations do they have to participate in the investigation process? specifically with respect to a student who might not want to relive a potentially traumatic experience?
So that's a great question. Thank you for that. I think the regulations try and walk a very complicated line about trying to address challenging conduct on a campus, both with respect to the individual and respect to the campus more broadly. But schools do not require individual students to participate in the process. Some of the challenges around evaluating some of these complaints, but there have been plenty of instances where individual complainants, respondents, and witnesses have stated that they will not participate. Schools can be a little bit more enforceable isn't exactly the word, but a little bit more encouraging of employees to participate in a process than students. But I think in my experience, this is the one place where schools are very careful about being deferential to the wishes of the individual students.
Thank you.
Thank you. You indicated that the institutions will have the burden of proof. But what is that burden? What is the levels beyond a reasonable doubt, but preponderance, clear, convincing? What is that burden they have to meet?
So if I understood you correctly, and there's
I'll repeat it.
some noise in the
You
background,
indicated that.
but it wasn't anything like the heavy metal band concert last night in the harbor. Let me just point out. The standard of proof is set forth as more reasonable, more likely than not, standard of proof, unless the school has a clear and convincing standard for all other proceedings. And then if that is the standard, the school can elect to use that standard of proof in their proceedings.
Any other questions or comments for Ms. Judge? Kurt?
Simply a question about, does a complainant waive their right to privacy if they use social media to talk about the case?
Well, schools can encourage individual parties not to talk about the allegations or the issues at play, but schools cannot shut down individual students' First Amendment rights to talk about individual situations. So I would say I'm answering in a little bit of a different way. When a student puts themselves out there in that way, they may themselves be waiving their privacy because they will subject themselves to some additional discussion, although also some individuals feel that is quite empowering and would like to get their information out. I think one of the also quite a difficult situation that schools face is when these allegations show up on social media, but there's no complaint made to the Title IX coordinator. And I've been involved in a number of those cases and had schools who are quite concerned around safety on their campus address sometimes anonymous posts, sometimes posts where people do have their name attached but are not willing to move forward, or where individuals are accused, right? And there's not sufficient accused in social media, but the complainant is unwilling to come forward. So the school is in a very interesting position of, sort of the community says, about this, why aren't you doing something about this? And the school doesn't have sufficient information to make a determination one way or the other around these particular cases. These are the challenges that schools face for sure.
Any other questions or comments? With these new obligations to train all employees now, are there tracking systems in place to do that at all of the institutions so that and you can report out that everyone has been trained?
There's lots of software programs. There's a whole industry out there that has popped up in response to this. And in my experience, schools have been quite diligent about this piece because although training, the regulations were effective August 1, the Department of Education acknowledged, or at least Kathleen Lehman acknowledged that the NACUA, the National Association of College and University Attorneys, when she spoke with us after the regulations were published, that she understood schools had to rev up to get this done. It's a lot of training. There are a lot of people to be trained. And so limited grace that's out there, but it wasn't expected that everyone was already trained and you were ready to go as of August 1. And I think schools are revving up and getting that done.
And does that training include third parties or other people working on the campus since they're now covered?
It should, right? It talks about all employees, but we've certainly had cases where third parties on campuses have been accused, unfortunately, of sexual misconduct. I think that other situations, and again, I'm going to go to my sports background, but you'd be surprised to find how many schools had not included their team doctors and other doctors who work with students on a regular basis in the training, and not intentionally excluded them. But also, of course, these doctors typically are going through their own trainings, if they're not employed by you, but whoever their employer may be. But I worked with the sports doctors group to talk about sexual violence and sexual misconduct in the wake of Nassar allegations. And they said the way schools evaluate these complaints and their reporting obligations under school procedures are quite different than what they are expected to do in their employment context under Title VII, and that they wished that they were included in these sessions, and you can do specific training. And that's just, team doctors are just one example, but there are many other third parties who come in and have very significant interaction with our students, and it's important to be able to show that you're doing some training with them as well. Absolutely.
Regent Fish?
Would summer camps that are held on our campuses are included in that then?
Summer camps are a big concern. Because first of all, who's running your summer camps? Some summer camps are completely independently run. Others have arrangements with people on campus or others. And how much schools, I think, have gotten up to speed in the wake of some of the cases that came around sexual misconduct and minor policies. The minors policy is something that schools have taken a lot of effort to look at and consider, and are requiring people to go through training before they are able to be an employee at a summer camp. So I'd imagine your schools have those policies in place. It would be something that any review would be evaluating and looking at as well.
And the training has to be through our campuses?
It's happening on your facilities, then you should be making sure that the training at least meets your guidelines, right? And your policies and procedures. It's quite important to have that. The other thing is you have safe sport. So where the camps are sport camps, for example, safe sport has its own sexual misconduct and reporting procedures and other things. And oftentimes your summer camps involve people who are subject to the safe sports standards because they're part of USA Swimming or US Soccer or whatever. So it's important also that the people who are running the summer camps, if they are covered in any way by safe sport, are also going through those trainings as well, which have independent reporting obligations. You can have a person who's involved in a sexual misconduct case on your campus, and because of their separate membership in an organization covered by safe sport, if, for example, your coach is also in an organization covered by safe sport, they have an obligation to both report to your Title IX coordinator, but also report what happened that happened within your education program or activity, but involves somebody covered by safe sport out to safe sport as well. It's a very complicated process.
Regent Wood?
Thank you for your presentation. My question is, once a Title IX coordinator gets a complaint, is there a time constraint within which the university must act?
You got it. One of the slides I skipped. Yes, the school must have reasonable timeframes in place in their policies for all of the major components of their process, and they must do their best to adhere to those timeframes. But as I did say, there can be extensions provided the school alerts the parties and says what the reasonable extensions of those timelines are. I think a significant criticism of the college process was, in some instances, how long it took to process these complaints on schools. They're difficult cases, as you can all imagine, and I know, as you know. But I think that the Office for Civil Rights in these regulations are attempting to put a reasonableness standard, but not a hard 60-day standard that we saw earlier, even though there was some flexibility in that.
Any other questions for Ms. Judge? Okay, seeing none, I want to thank you again for a very insightful and sobering presentation. We appreciate learning the differences and what we had and where we're going. And I don't recall, did you say that federal dollars to implement this came with it?
I missed that provision. I would like to say, I am impressed with this group that you have now had 2 trainings, and I appreciate the fact that you've allowed me to get into the weeds as much as I have, because it would be difficult for anyone to say that you have not been appropriately trained under Title IX, under both the 2020 regulations, where we spent 2 hours discussing those, and under the new 2024 regulations. I'm proud to be associated with you. Thank you very much.
In my excitement over learning more about the new Title IX, I inadvertently forgot our president's welcome. So President Wilhelm, will you please take the podium?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning again to everybody. If I had not the pleasure to meet you, I'm Fernando Miralles Willem. I'm, as of July 1st of this year, President of the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, and also serve as Vice Chancellor for Sustainability of the University System of Maryland. It is my pleasure and privilege to host you today. I've been told that this is a little bit of a rite of passage to the new president. So I embrace that in full form, and I'm really, really pleased that we're all here today. I know many of you were here with us yesterday in our welcome dinner and took a tour of our facilities. I hope you enjoyed it. As I look at this operation today and yesterday, I realize how much of an effort this is. So I wanted to give a real quick shout out to the team that put this together. Here on my right, a few people at UMCS, as well as with the system office. So if we can give a 5-second hand to these people. One of the privilege I'll tell you is I've been blessed with a great team to work with, both at UMCS and at the system, and today and yesterday is proof of that. I wanted to do 2 things very briefly this morning. I think I want to first extend a note of gratitude to the Regents, and I want to do that at both a personal level. Since about 7 months ago, I interviewed for this job in this building, and I interviewed with the Board of Regents, and many of you were there, I'm sure, and might remember that. I remember it certainly because I came out of that meeting saying, I can definitely do this, and this will be a great group of people to work with. And as I've gotten to know you more and more, I've met with many of you one-on-one and chatted about UMCS, about the system, about the future. Every day I get more excited, and in great measure is because of your leadership and your guidance. Guidance in items as important, for example, as what we're just discussing, Title IX updates, very serious matters. And navigating such serious matters is incredibly difficult for an individual alone, for an institution alone. The only way we can get through this is by working together. And this community that we have here today is a great expression of that. And I think at a second level, I want to share the excitement about the work that takes place and the research and education that takes place at our institutions. This building where we are today, houses the headquarters of the system. It also houses one of the 6 locations of UMSIS, the Institute for Marine and Environmental Technology, or IMET as we've come to know it. And IMET is very special even within the system and even for UMSIS, because IMET is actually a team effort of UMSIS, UMB, UMBC, and Towson, in many of the activities. And I know that we interact a lot with many of the other institutions. It is an actual representation, is the embodiment of this word that I keep hearing in the systemness, right? We're doing it already, right? So it is great. And I know that many of you have seen it already and were in the tour. So I want to thank everybody for coming. We have a very nice video I was sharing with Madam Chair Gooden this morning. I think part of my job today was to get you pumped up, right, for this meeting, given the seriousness of issues that you have on the agenda. Again, the example that we just discussed. So hopefully this brief video will get you pumped up. This video was made possible by a grant from the USM Foundation Quasi Endowment Program. And after the video, which is very brief, I'll turn it over to Madam Chair Gooden and Chancellor Perman for next items of the agenda. Welcome again, and thanks for being here.
The world's environmental challenges are interconnected and complex. At the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, UMSIS, renowned researchers are working on solutions. The Chesapeake Bay and its watershed are our laboratory.
One of the powerful parts of UMSIS is that it is comprehensive. Mountains to the sea, sky to the bottom of the bay, microbes to ecosystems.
We all need clean air to breathe, clean water to drink. We need healthy forests. We need sustainable agriculture, sustainably produced food. But there's major environmental challenges that threaten our natural resources. We bring together collaborative teams, interdisciplinary teams of scientists to help address these big challenges, both here in Maryland and throughout the world.
What I think is so unique about UMSIS is its ability to innovate and be nimble in the problems that it addresses. And these can be coastal problems at the Chesapeake Bay local level, or these can be global problems.
The future of the Chesapeake Bay is tied into our individual actions now, but also forces that are well beyond the borders of the Chesapeake Bay. Changes in climate, changes in water level are all going to be challenges moving into the future.
UMSIS is unique in the depth and breadth of its expertise and its legacy of collaboration. No one takes a more extensive view of this remarkable watershed and is able to apply it to systems around the world.
For the past 100 years, this institution has been working hard to understand the ecology and the biology of the natural resources, oysters, crabs, striped bass, menhaden.
The lessons that we're learning about greenhouse gases in a local estuary like the Chesapeake Bay can then go global. And we can take that knowledge and go not just from the estuary, but into the land itself, into the rivers, into agricultural systems, and then take it even further, like the Arctic.
One of the really unique parts of UMSIS is that we have this duality. That is, we're mandated to do really good world-class research on the one hand, and on the other hand, to apply it, use it for the public good.
We face many complex environmental challenges that have not just science elements, but political, social, cultural, ethical elements to them. So we need to really hear from a diversity of perspectives, experiences, expertise in order to study and solve these problems.
And it's in this environment that UMSIS prepares the next generation of environmental leaders.
Graduate students are always moving, and I feel like they are the heart and the blood of UMSIS, and they really keep everything going.
The thing that makes me the most optimistic is the outstanding graduate students that we produce, because Those graduate students will continue their work for decades to come, and they are highly motivated to address some of the challenges that are facing us.
UMSI's role as trusted scientific advisor is more important than ever, and its groundbreaking research has changed the way we think about the environment. There is more to do, and all who share a passion for the Chesapeake Bay, its land, and its people have a role.
I think there's a lot of value in being curious about our environment and discovering new things in our environment. Getting new data, discovering novel things, that's really exciting. And then being able to flesh it out and sort of see how the whole thing is put together, that's really exciting.
Our ability to collect data has outpaced the speed that we can analyze it. And so a lot of the work that is on the horizon is taking all this data that we have and trying to analyze it to understand, what it can tell us about the estuary.
Well, we care. I mean, if we want to find solutions, we have to understand what's happening.
It's easy to think that on one person, what I do doesn't really matter, but the activities of us individually and collectively as a whole really matter for what happens in terms of our environment. And we have big environmental challenges that we need to be addressing.
The science and technology that comes out of UMSIS is already making a difference in people's lives. There's much more work for us to do, and we're positioned to do it.
I think it's important that we leave the world a better place than we found it. And I am hopeful that the scientific solutions that we develop here at UMSIS will help lead to a more sustainable and more resilient world.
This time, the Chancellor will come forward and do his report.
Fernando, inspiring. That was wonderful. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like as well to extend a warm welcome to Regent Druvak-Marani. Look forward to working with you. We've had some great conversations already. And I would be remiss not to mention another member of this board. Yesterday, I was honored to speak at the dedication of the Catherine and Isaiah Leggett Math and Science Building at Montgomery College. Near as I could see, virtually everyone in the county attended the dedication, and there were dozens of elected leaders. Ike, you deserve, and Catherine deserves every bit of that recognition. The outpouring of admiration for Ike and Catherine's vision of higher education, their support of higher education, it was not only extraordinary, but of course it's entirely deserved, as we know from having the privilege of working with Ike. I welcome our new Vice Chancellor for Communications and Marketing, Mike Sandler, and I certainly thank our host yesterday and today, Dr. Fernando Morales-Wilhelm. As United States higher education takes decisive action to fight our climate crisis, and I discussed this with co-authors in the current edition of the AGB magazine. I look forward to your leadership, not only as UMSI's president, but as the system's vice chancellor for sustainability. Dr. Morales-Wilhelm has come aboard at an exciting time for UMSI's. This summer, the university released its annual report card on the health of the Chesapeake Bay. The Bay got a C+. Not extraordinary by our standards, but it's the highest in 20 years. And the reason I'm pointing it out is that improvement is a credit to UMSI's influence in environmental science and policy and practice, and a sign that this university has an indispensable role in the sizable work that remains. Of course, UMSI's impact is felt far beyond Maryland. The university's new app, Future Urban Climates, allows people to match the expected future climate of their hometown with the current climate of another city or region. By bringing greater clarity to the impacts of climate change, UMSI's hopes to galvanize the public will to stop it, to slow down climate change. Now, let me broaden my remarks to the system as a whole. I'll start with our newest Elkins professors. These are named by the system. The Elkins professorship support allows compelling scholarship, promotes compelling scholarship that advances the system's public service mission. Dr. Manas Moellam from Towson University will establish computing and cybersecurity clubs for girls, serving as a research and professional development hub for TU's education faculty, aiming ultimately to close race and gender gaps in these fields. Professor Rabiat Akunde from UMB's Carey School of Law will explore the relationship between law and colonial power, engaging communities affected by colonial and post-colonial dynamics. Dr. Miao Yu from College Park continues her project with UMSIS and UMES, investigating novel sensing and robotics tools for the study of marine ecosystems. That research team will include graduate, undergraduate, and high school students. Continuum. Dr. Rosemary Shumba of Bowie State University will explore a center for experiential learning that improves computing education access, affordability, and quality for underrepresented students. All important work. These projects are a testament to the public serving scholarship that advances our excellence, our collective excellence, excellence that's consistently validated in national rankings. So let me talk about national rankings for a minute. Each year, Forbes measures affordability, quality, graduation success, and post-grad earnings. It singled out Towson, UMBC, Salisbury, UMGC, U-Balt, and College Park rose to 12th among all U.S. public universities in that recognition. The Princeton Review ranks colleges on a number of academic experiences indices. Salisbury, UMBC, College Park made its list. Money Magazine cares about return on investment, which everybody's talking about. The magazine name-checked UMBC, College Park, Towson, Salisbury, Bowie, Coppin, Frostburg, UMES. Return on investment. The Wall Street Journal considers student outcomes, learning environments, diversity. The journal gave a nod to Salisbury, UMBC, College Park. Towson was ranked 40th overall and 15th among publics. Washington Monthly measures social mobility, public service, and research. Every one of our eligible schools made their best value list for the Northeast. Times Higher Education looked at gender equality in education. UMBC, College Park made the list. Towson was named sixth best university in the world for gender equality, the U.S. highest ranking university. President Ginsburg, well done. Phi Theta Kappa looks at dynamic pathways supporting transfer students. Kurt Ubalt made their honor roll. Now let me keep going to individual excellence because I like to brag on the institutions and their students and their faculty. Coppin State's Melanie Sofia Morales Menendez has been named a White House HBCU scholar. Nicole Ibrahim is the first ever UMSI student to win a Boren Fellowship, which will take her to the Kazakhstan Academy of Sciences. Spoken word artist and UBalt MFA alumna Breon Gill was named the 11th poet laureate of Maryland. And this summer, a record-setting 122 teams, thousands of students, competed in the world's largest intercollegiate rocketry competition. And it was College Park that took home the big trophy. I want to talk about our growth. And growth in students is always the most exciting. As you know, last fall, USM enrollment post-pandemic climbed for the first time in 5 years, rebounding from pandemic-era drops. This year we've just started, many of our universities are predicting sustained growth. UMBC expects its largest first-year class in history. Salisbury, its second largest. UMES is looking at the largest new student class in 6 years, and total enrollment nearing an all-time high. New students at Frostburg should number the highest since COVID, with a climb in transfer students and students majoring in education, health, natural sciences, the very disciplines housed in FSU's newest academic building. Very good news, Vice President D'Elia. Growth in our academic portfolio also needs to be called out. This keeps the system responsive to emerging and high-need disciplines. Salisbury students can now fast-track their ways to careers in aerospace and nanotechnology through the university's new engineering physics major. UMGC has just launched an accelerated flexible MBA program, allowing students to tailor the degree to their areas of interest. Next spring, the USM at Hagerstown will launch its own MBA program in partnership with UBalt. Well done, Dr. Ashby. Maryland Carey Law at UMB has launched the first defense clinic of its kind, which focuses on supporting high-poverty clients susceptible to unvalidated or unreliable forensic evidence. UMBC has opened the Institute of Politics to produce credible research on our political systems and electoral processes, to elevate the quality of our discourse and our citizenship. We all want that. President Shears Ashby, thank you. College Park is offering refugee students the chance to earn a degree while providing a pathway to resettlement and U.S. citizenship. Thank you, President Pines. UMES has hired Dr. Stanley Robinson as the first permanent dean for what we hope will be the coming School of Veterinary Medicine. That was just one milestone I marked last Friday when President Anderson, Regent Lewis, and I celebrated UMES's Founders Week. Regent Lewis I think I speak on behalf of both of us when I say how gratifying it was to share the UMES story of strength and fast rising prominence. Thank you again, President Anderson. When I spoke at yesterday's dedication for the Catherine and Isaiah Leggett building, I referred to an exemplar in education pathways, which we've been talking about in Montgomery County, the ACES program at the universities at Shady Grove. It links Montgomery County schools, Montgomery College, and USG to speed, to make seamless college completion. Well, USG has just announced additional support to the program to further boost college enrollment among underrepresented students, and we thank Dr. Kandemian for her leadership. Supporting all of this work are buildings, yes, brick and mortar spaces where we come together to learn, to teach, to collaborate, to discover. Last month, I joined President Breaux to dedicate Bowie State's new Martin Luther King Jr. Center, housing history, government, language, literature, culture, communications. And that's proof yet again, amidst all the angst, that the liberal arts are alive and thriving at our institutions. Towson's new health professions building is a high-tech, high-touch masterpiece, a model for interprofessional health and wellness education. If buildings support our academic work, then it's the generosity of our friends that fuels it. Let me start with some very good friends indeed. Regent Yvette Lewis and her husband Ed helped launch the Fresh Start Scholarship Program at Bowie State. The scholarships help formerly incarcerated students earn their degree. The Lewis's investment puts the fund over the endowment mark, meaning the money can be grown for generations. Prison education is a huge priority for us. We appreciate Regent Wood's leadership, and thank you, Regent Lewis. With an MHEC grant of $2 million, Frostburg will hire more nursing faculty and staff in a bid to expand its LPN to BSN pipeline and grow Western Maryland's core of highly qualified nurses. The School of Nursing at UMB won $5 million from the state to expand its program in West Baltimore to improve healthcare access and outcomes while reducing costs. Researchers from UMCES have won a $1 million NSF grant to use big data tools to support the conservation of migratory birds throughout Appalachia. College Park is celebrating a number of new multi-million-dollar awards. A partnership with IonQ to mature quantum computers so that they can be optimized for national security purposes, an NSF-funded engineering research center to investigate the environmental costs of refrigeration technologies and develop better cooling systems, a U.S. DOE project to evaluate next-gen hydrogen vehicle fueling stations, and a massive achievement, agreement with NOAA, funding UMD's Cooperative Institute for Satellite Earth System Studies, whose consortium of researchers investigates how human activity interacts with the Earth's environment. One achievement after another, President Pines. And always, always, our universities use their gifts and grants, their programs and partnerships to benefit their communities. Salisbury is going to use a $400,000 NSF grant to help their government, business, and nonprofit partners use AI to solve critical challenges. And they'll use a Maryland Heritage Grant to make the exhibits and artifacts of the Museum of Eastern Shore Culture accessible to visitors with disabilities. Thank you, President LaPree. UMAS will use over $2 million in federal funds to support economic development, revitalization, and entrepreneurship in Princess Anne. UMGC and Open Classrooms will use an almost $4 million grant from the U.S. Department of Labor to scale up apprenticeships and degree pathways in tech fields. Coppin is leading the redevelopment of West North Avenue, a couple of miles from here, the first HBCU in the nation to oversee the revitalization of a major urban corridor. And it's the kind of work, Anthony, that UMB, your partner, has long championed. Its School of Medicine is spearheading a community health village at a mall that has slowly decayed in West Baltimore over the years, Mondawmin Mall, which now has been reimagined. It's part of a longstanding partnership, Dr. Gerald, with West Baltimore's residents to develop and deliver healthcare responsive to neighborhood needs. You know, it's a wonderful partnership opportunity. I'm well familiar with it for two universities, UMB and Coppin, both deeply engaged in West Baltimore. Just look at the programs we've launched to support our education partners. We always stress the fact that education is a continuum. UMGC just completed an 18-month partnership with St. Mary's County Public Schools to grow the county's certified teachers, again, highlighting the local mission of President Fowler's global campus. He's got a local mission too, which he pays attention to. I'm going to shout out Coppin again. It's celebrating its Pathways to Professions program, which offers teachers post-bac credentials toward advanced degrees. That program has more than doubled enrollment and achieved nearly perfect scores for course completion and content mastery. And President Bowie State's Black Male Teachers College gets more and more well-deserved national attention. Somebody asked about summer camps a few minutes ago. Our campuses, yes, were teeming with young learners over the summer as camps and competitions connected them to college and got them excited about learning. So here I want to mention our wonderful RHEC in Southern Maryland, the USM at Southern Maryland, which hosted a camp this summer for local students learning mechanical design, electronics, robotics, and coding. But the summer's over, and our Regional Higher Education Center Director at Southern Maryland, Dr. Eileen Abel, kept to her commitment to kids. USM-SM stepped up to host students and teachers from Esperanza Middle School while their classrooms needed sudden remediation. 300 kids, 300. I just want to close by saying that that example is a testament to our lived mission, that we consistently be of service to our communities, that we eagerly open our doors to all. And yes, I'm not a fool. By inviting that group of youngsters, offering them a place they might enjoy for a few weeks, might be a place they ultimately come to stay. So, Madam Chair, this concludes my report.
Thank you, Chancellor Perman. Any questions or comments for Chancellor Perman? Seeing none, we'll
Madam
invite
Chair.
Dr. Haverback. Oh,
Yes, I do have a comment. Just want to take a moment to acknowledge the Baltimore Business Journal CEO of the Year, Dr. Jay Perman. And I also want to make note that Jay is the first non-business CEO to earn this distinct honor. Congratulations, Jay.
we can't forget you, President Jenkins, who made the Power 10, also representing education. Brilliant. So Dr. Haverback, we're going to now hear from the Council of University System Faculty. Welcome.
Good morning, Chair Gooden, members of the Board of Regents, Chancellor Perman, and the university presidents. Thank you for having me this morning. For anybody new, I would like to quickly introduce myself. My name is Heather Rogers Haverback, and I am the chairperson of CUSIF, that is the Council of University System Faculty. I'm a proud graduate of College Park, where I got my PhD in educational psychology and human development in 2007. That same year, I started at Towson University, and I am still a professor there. My research is focused on my research and teaching are both focused on teacher education and content-specific self-efficacy beliefs within teachers. This is my second year as the CUSIF chairperson and my last year due to the bylaws. So I am enthusiastic to make this a great year of collaboration with all of us in shared governance. My report, per usual, is going to be brief because I also know that you read the materials that I shared. The Council of University System Faculty, CUSIF, had its first general body meeting this past Wednesday. Currently, the CUSIF committee chairs are in place. At our September meeting, the committees held their first meeting. They're working on their membership, and they are also working on their initiatives and goals. I'm not a betting woman, but I'm guessing that we would see some goals and initiatives that have come forth in the past, but I'm also hoping that we can really focus on some new initiatives. In addition to the past work, I've asked committees to refer to the USM strategic plan, and at our first meeting, Allison Rinn, the USM Senior Vice Chancellor for Academic and Student Affairs, gave a report from the USM, answered questions, and she also gave a USM strategic plan overview. I gave a brief overview of the purpose of CUSIF and the role that we play within the USM and how that should guide our initiatives. XCOM, our executive committee, also had their first meeting on September 4th. And again, we're working for possible committee work, the sharing of shared governance reports, and things to come that have been new this year. In closing, I have shared the shared governance reports with my materials. I shared my report as well as a PowerPoint if you would like to see it in two different formats. One might be a quicker read than the other, although I try to keep things brief, and therefore I believe that the report's only 7 pages. In closing, I know that faculty are wearing a lot of hats, more than I believe we have ever worn. And 2024 has proven to have unique challenges. The faculty appreciate all of the support that you give to us, and we look forward to a wonderful year of collaboration. That concludes my report.
Thank you. And any questions for Dr. Haverback? Okay, seeing none, thank you for your report. We'll now move to Dr. Patricio for the Council of University System Staff report.
Chair Gooden, Chancellor Perman, USM Regents, USM Presidents, good morning. First, to President Morales-Wilhelm, thank you for being a wonderful host and welcoming us so warmly. The dinner yesterday was lovely, and the tour of the IMET research facility was truly amazing. The research you're doing here, here in the heart of Baltimore, of all places, has far and broad-reaching consequences, and I look forward. Yes, sorry. The research you're doing here has broad-reaching consequences, and I really look forward to seeing how the research you're doing influences the future of sustainable and fish welfare conscious aquaculture. I'd also like to thank the Regents and USM for their recognition of the important work of staff with the awarding of the Board of Regents Staff Awards this morning. Our staff are truly amazing and do work that advances the research, student well-being, and financial future of the USM and its institutions. I feel honored to have been elected to represent them. I know many of you from my past 2 years as chair as the Council of University System staff, but for those who are new, I'd like to say welcome and introduce myself. My name is Kalia Patricio, and I have worked at the University of Maryland College Park for 12 years in the Division of Student Affairs. I live in the world of finance, policy administration, and human resources. I'm a proud UMD alum, having received my PhD in education policy there in 2020. To each of the regents, and as always, the USM presidents and Chancellor Perman, I look forward to partnering and working with you all this year. My report for you is in the packet of materials for today's meeting, so I won't bore you with reading it, but I will ask that you take a look to review our leadership roster for this year, our schedule of meetings, and a review of some of our recent accomplishments and goals for this coming year. I'd like to highlight one of the biggest areas I plan to focus on for this year. This focus comes as a result of the Shared Governance Awareness Survey we did at the end of the last academic year. I will review the findings with you all at the November meeting. But I will say for now that these findings, combined with the recently approved AFSCME MOU, has staff looking to me as the leader of non-bargaining eligible employees and asking what shared governance does for them. I am a firm believer in shared governance, which I hope is obvious by me standing before you today. But I fear it is at risk, and I'm looking to partner with everyone in this room to show staff and even faculty that shared governance can be an effective means of partnership, creating positive outcomes for non-bargaining employees, and providing input for meaningful institutional guidance. I end my report today to acknowledge what a tumultuous year we have had. And I don't mean 2024 necessarily, though it has been difficult, but the past 30 days in particular. Staff, faculty, and university leadership are facing a torrent of criticism, managing situations that have no precedence or a single right way to address them. What I see most and hear most from staff in these situations is the vitriol they receive in the process of trying to do their jobs in their efforts to serve all of our students and provide safe campuses that also protect free speech. Within these stories is hurt, fear, resilience, and a continued determination to serve all students. But I fear that we've lost our humanity and we've lost our ability to see those at our institutions as individuals and as humans. As a staff member, I ask you to keep this work, these challenges, and most of all, the humanity of those involved in mind as you help guide the work of the USM. Thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you for an excellent report. And any questions or comments for Dr. Patricia? Seeing none, thank you again. We have the Council of University System Presidents with Dr. Burrell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning. Good morning. It's good to see you all. Madam Chair, Board of Regents, colleagues, and guests, good morning. It's so wonderful to be here again, and I'd like to echo the comments made already about the wonderful, wonderful welcome we received and the extraordinary tours that we received yesterday. Thank you to our hosts, President Morales-Wilhelm, and I'm ready for the spelling test that you challenged us with last night. And welcome to the Council of University System Presidents. It's great to have you on board. And congratulations to all the staff awardees who were recognized this morning. And again, CUSP congratulates the Chancellor on the well-deserved recognition as the CEO of the Year. And congratulations to all presidents on the many and varied achievements that were outlined in the Chancellor's report. Before I move on with my formal remarks, I would like to take a point of personal privilege here to thank Regent Yvette Lewis and her husband, Ed, for the establishment of a new endowment focused on the fresh start of formerly incarcerated individuals. Thank you so much for recognizing that huge need and for establishing such an important and surely to be impactful endowment. Would you give Regent Yvette Lewis once again a round of applause? House met 3 times since the last board meeting on July 1st, August 5th, and September 9th. The July 1st meeting focused on the revisions of the USM Title IX policy, and I don't need to elaborate anymore on that. Senior Vice Chancellor Wren reviewed the revisions, and the presidents discussed the revisions and subsequent rollout on our campuses. The August meeting focused on 2 topics, meet and confer, and an operating budget update. Chancellor Perman discussed matters related to meet and confer, and Senior Vice Chancellor Herbst discussed matters related to the operating budget update. The September 9th meeting included several topics. The Maryland Department of Service and Civic Innovation Secretary Paul Montero, who met with the presidents to discuss their service program, and Associate Vice Chancellor Lee discussed the Student Region tuition waiver policy. Senior Vice Chancellor Wren discussed the athletic training programs within this USM. And finally, Chancellor Perman discussed the proposed day of dialogue. This concludes my remarks and the formal report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Bro. Any questions or comments for President Bro? Well,
Thank you.
our last report of the councils is for the University of Maryland Student Council, and Ms. Gambier will present that report. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Gooden, the Board of Regents, Chancellor Perman, and University Presidents. Just to reintroduce myself, my name is Benavi Gambier. I'm extremely grateful to serve in my 2nd term as the President of the University System of Maryland Student Council. I would also like to reintroduce Arslan Siddiqui from UMD College Park as Vice President of Graduate Affairs, and Meghna Chandrasekharan from UMBC as the Vice President of Undergraduate Affairs. Since the start of the term in July, the executive team has had multiple meetings to discuss our goals for the term and plan for the execution of various events. We sent out our applications and collected interest for Board of Regent applications, and the candidates were then reviewed and selected in early September. The board of directors for this term include Jefferson Reyes from University of Maryland College Park as Director of Government Affairs, and as a co-director of Government Affairs, we have Jaden Ferris from University of Maryland, Baltimore County. The Director of Student Affairs for this term will be Francois Nicholas from University of Maryland Global Campus. And we are still in the process of looking for candidates for the Director of Communications and Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. In August, I met a few times with the Governor's Office for Children and nominated a student from the USM to serve on the Maryland Youth Advisory Council. And I hope to continue collaborating with them throughout the year to discuss important conversations on climate change, civic engagement, mental health, and more to see how these conversations can start earlier on in K through 12. On Sunday, September 15th, we hosted our first general body meeting at the Elkins Building in Adelphi, which was attended by almost all USM student representatives. And apart from just the general onboarding protocol, we had an open conversation about topics that were pertinent to many institutions. And this was a very brief conversation, but I'll just give a general overview of some pointers that we felt may have applied to multiple institutions. This conversation started off with a brief discussion on health insurance, especially for non-traditional students and students with who develop or who get a temporary disability during their time in the university and what that would look like for them. And we don't know the extent to which this would be a system-wide level policy, but this was definitely a discussion that was campus-specific. We also discussed briefly the USM statement on marking October 7th, and there were some questions on what the day of dialogue would look like and whether this was a system-wide standard protocol or whether this could look different among institutions. And finally, a big part of our discussion was actually civic engagement across campuses, and that is in line with the previous Chancellor's Council meeting that happened. And I told everyone that I would come back and I would ask the students at this meeting what civic engagement was looking like at their campuses. And some major points that were mentioned were various initiatives, including debate watch parties. There were some mentions of open bipartisan conversations among students and political leaders. They were mentioning advertising ballot drop boxes on social media, various residence hall competitions to encourage resident assistants to get involved in the process of ensuring students are registered to vote, and more. So this was definitely something that students felt comfortable and confident with. And just with a quick show of hands, the vast majority of the students at that meeting also believed that shared governance had a good relationship with faculty and faculty senate. So that was something really nice to hear. But we are definitely going to continue this conversation in future meetings. This year, along with the student regent interviews and the Board of Regents Student Excellence Scholarship Program, which we look forward to planning for the rest of this term, I would say our goals for this council are more qualitative. The hope is definitely this term, at least, to foster a more open and collaborative environment for student representatives in line with Vision 2030 and the transition from institution-centric to more student-centric dialogue. For virtual meetings, we're hoping this might look like more breakout rooms that are led by directors on various topics of interest. And for in-person meetings, we feel this might involve having campus reports lead to open conversation rather than just being a standalone agenda item. And given the time that we're in and the difficult time that we are in for students, faculty, staff, administrators, everyone in the system, as a student, I did just want to give a very brief sentence at the end to express our gratitude. And I can't speak for all students in the system, obviously, but as a student, I do feel like I have a responsibility to convey that we are extremely grateful for the effort that everyone puts in every single day. And I do know that we understand and we acknowledge how serious these conversations are and how this isn't just about students, but it's also about how everyone in this system is dealing with this, and that everyone just wants the system to run as best of a way as possible and for students to feel heard and safe. And for that, we are extremely, extremely grateful. Thank you so much. We look forward to a wonderful term ahead. And Madam Chair, that concludes my report.
Well said, Ms. Gambier, and thank you for the report. We'll now turn to the consent agenda. The decisions regarding which items to include on the consent agenda were made by me and the committee chairs. However, any regent may request that an item be removed from the consent agenda for separate review and discussion. Before I move approval of the consent agenda, I ask if there are any items that any regent would like removed from the consent agenda for separate review and discussion. Seeing none, I move approval of all of the items on the consent agenda. Can I get a second? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion passes. Our next order of business is the committee reports. We have one item for the committee of the whole. As you know, we stood up a task force to review protocols around the reporting to the board when major investigations occur at a university. The body conducted its work over the summer and has produced a set of recommendations. Regent Breslin chaired the task force and will present its work and findings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, it's not lost on me. My place on this agenda is, if I'm not mistaken, is I'm sitting between this group and lunch. So I can assure you that oh, no? Okay, good. Then I don't have to be as brief as I thought I would. At any
Take
rate,
it back here.
At any rate, it's my pleasure to report back what our task force has accomplished. But before I do so, I'd just like to credit, and if you would bring up our first slide, but credit the members of our task force who participated in this activity. And I have to say that in the first meeting that we had, I challenged the task force with the notion that we need to be very thorough in our review of university system policies, but also I believe we needed to be prompt because we thought it was really important work. And our goal was to report back to this group by our September board meeting. So I stand here today and say we have met that goal, and we did do a thorough review of all policies, and my committee was very committed to getting that done. So I applaud them for their work over the summer to ensure that we were able to do that. So I want to thank the task force members, first of all, for accomplishing that. My fellow regents, Tom McMillan, Louis Pope, and Bill Wood. I'd like to thank Assistant Attorney General Catherine Bainbridge and the Office of the Attorney General for their help, and our MVP on the committee, Kelsey Beckett, for keeping us on track and for gathering the materials and things needed for us to do that thorough review. I'd like to mention our charge, and if you could go to the first or the second slide, I guess, on here. Our task force was asked to review existing policies and practices and discuss potential policy development. The task force review addressed the following questions. What is the as-is environment that exists? What is the to-be goal? Where are the gaps, if any, in our policies? How can we close them? And who should do it, should there be a need? Our goal was to make sure reporting standards are strong and presidents understand their reporting requirements. Clearer reporting requirements ensure the chancellor and the board are aware of major incidents and can act appropriately. So if you move to the second slide. So our recommendations, and by the way, I'll stop here and say the details on our task force report obviously are in today's packet of information, as well as all the policies that we reviewed. But having done so, reviewed the pertinent policies to identify gaps. We reviewed 11 documents and recommended changes to 6 policies. The changes generally clarify reporting requirements to ensure that individuals know when to report incidents in investigations and to whom they should report. We recommend expanding on the policy on the communications of suspected fraud, unethical, and illegal business activity to encourage reporting of broader categories of illegal and unethical conduct, or misconduct, I should say. We also reviewed several other policies and found reporting requirements on those policies were satisfactory. The Attorney General's office drafted language that our second recommendation is that the Attorney General drafted language that the task force recommends to be included in future presidents' appointment letters and or contracts and in a letter to current sitting presidents. And the text, obviously, of that recommendation you can see on the screen. I won't read it. It outlines the responsibility of presidents to inform the chancellor of any matter with potential or substantial negative impact to the institution, the USM system, the leadership, or the Board of Regents. And lastly, our task force recommends that the system look at a more robust software system to report and track instances of fraud and abuse and recommend its use by all. We were made aware of the ethics point system that we believe is being used currently by Towson University, the University of Maryland, Baltimore, and the University of Maryland, College Park, and encourage the system to make that particular software program universal across our campuses, as we believe that's the best mechanism for the type of reporting that we want to be available, and the ease with which we need that for people who would like to report some of the conduct. So overall, our task force found that the reporting requirements are already quite strong across the USM's policies. We recommend that the relevant committees consider our recommended policy amendments to further strengthen those requirements. And with that, I thank again the task force members and the board for reviewing our report. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions for Regent Breslin? Yes, Andy?
Well, thank you. It's actually more of a thank you than a question, but I just want to acknowledge how important this is for a board like ours, because I think this role that we're in of always trying to walk this line, making sure that we are not meddling, making sure that we're not micromanaging campuses, while at the same time doing the necessary work of accountability of governance. It's a tough position for us to be in, sometimes knowing where to act and where not to. The recommendations in your report are excellent. They are going to help us do that job much better. So the time that you and the other members took and the staff, much appreciated. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you.
Lewis?
As a member of the task force, one of the things that we discussed was the reporting by individuals. And as chairman of the audit committee, we get a report every audit meeting on reports to the fraud hotline, which is administered by the audit office of the system. This document also proposes to expand that. So instead of an individual anywhere in the system, be it a student or a faculty member or staff member, whatever, could report whatever they wish to the hotline. Wouldn't necessarily be a fraud hotline anymore, but a broad. Those reports can be anonymous, or they can be signed off on by the individual. It's certainly a lot easier. We go over this every audit meeting. It's certainly easier to investigate something when you actually know who reported it in the first place, and you can discuss it with them. But anyway, this is going to be proposed system-wide, so we can gather in instances. We've had several incidents over the last several years that if a student or a staff member had the ability to report issues which were festering but were going to become quite important in the future, and they didn't know where to report it, and they didn't want to necessarily discuss it with their superiors or staff, and it gives a new mechanism. So I think it's a great safety measure for the system as a whole. Anyway, thanks.
Other questions or comments? Okay, seeing no.
In closing, I would just, on behalf of our committee, I would just ask that the pertinent staff get these recommendations to the appropriate committees for their prompt review, so that if they agree with the policy changes, they can be implemented promptly. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Breslin. This item is listed in the board as an information item, but it is appropriate for the board to vote its acceptance of the recommendations. And then those recommendations will go to the appropriate committees, and then the policies will go through the normal governance policy process before the policies themselves are voted on. And so I would like to move that the board accept the recommendations of the Major Investigations Task Force. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so this now presented to the appropriate folks, and they will get the process started. The final item on our public session today is the Committee on Education Policy, Student Life and Safety. So this brings us to the report from the Committee on Education Policy and Student Life and Safety. Senior Vice Chancellor Wren will introduce the presentation and its speakers.
Thank you, Chair Gooden. And I'd like to thank Chair Gooden for asking that we move this off the consent calendar and share it with the full board and all of the presidents. This is a presentation we did in our committee, and we've also done with our provosts in the system. The RHECs are a valuable and unique asset for the university system in Maryland and the state of Maryland. And we want to be sure that everyone gets to hear an update on the great work that is happening in our 3 RHECs. And so without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to my colleagues who lead these great places, beginning with Dr. Jacob Ashby at Hagerstown. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. I want to start by thanking the system and the board and also the presidents for their support as I've transitioned into this role as the executive director at USMH. And I'd specifically like to recognize Hugh Breslin, who has always been an advocate for us, although he did just tell you that I was standing between you and lunch. So with that, I'll get started. USMH currently has 6 partners. We have Frostburg State, Salisbury University, the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, UMGC, Towson, and we just added, as the Chancellor mentioned, UBAUT, which will be starting an MBA program shortly. I provided a brief quote here on the slide that you can read from our graduation speaker last spring. But the reason that I wanted to provide this to you is that while our numbers may be small, you can see from this that our impact on students is large, and so is our impact on the community. We are uniquely located in the skinny portion of Maryland. It's 10 miles between Pennsylvania and West Virginia. We currently border Allegheny, well, I guess not currently, we always have bordered Allegheny, Frederick, Franklin County, PA, Fulton County, PA, Loudoun County, Virginia, Berkeley County, West Virginia, Jefferson County, West Virginia, and Morgan County, West Virginia. So our students come from Washington County, but they also come from those surrounding regions. The top 5 industries in our county are healthcare, retail trade, educational services, construction, and public administration. And outside of those, there's also logistics, hospitality, and manufacturing. The top employers in Washington County are WCPS, which is our public school system, FedEx Ground, Meritus Health, the state of Maryland, Volvo Group, Amazon, Fiserv, the Bowman Group, and Hagerstown Community College. Washington County currently has a 23% bachelor's attainment rate. We have a 9% poverty rate, and we have an ALICE rate, which is those living above poverty, but who cannot afford a living, of 29%. And so with all of that data and background, we're obviously trying to increase that bachelor's attainment rate to help others find success in their lives. So with the information provided, I just wanted to give you a little context on where we see opportunities for growth. And those are in healthcare, social services, education, and business. And that's generally where we're offering programs right now, and that's what aligns with our workforce. We are very uniquely positioned to provide value to students. We have small class sizes, and most of our classes are offered in the evening to adjust for working adults. We have specific support services that we offer on campus, including exam proctoring, writing support, library services, and regular student events. We also make college completion more affordable because we use a 2+2 pathway. And this is important to me because I was able to get out of my bachelor's degree with no debt, which has set me up for success in my life. We also fundraise our own scholarships. Last year, we raised over $90,000, and these scholarships can be combined with institutional scholarships to make education even more affordable. We also have 4 buildings. Our main building is owned by the system. It's 77,000 square feet, and then we rent 3 additional buildings for specific program use. And in closing, I hope that you guys will engage with USMH in the future and recognize the value that we bring, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have along the way. We uniquely have a bifurcated mission in that we don't just educate the students in our region, but we also work to revitalize the downtown Hagerstown area. USM made a large investment when they brought USMH to downtown Hagerstown, and since then we've seen economic development in the region, but that economic development has enhanced, and recently we've had the development of downtown cultural trail, which ends at the USMH Plaza, We've had the development of a Meredith Park, which is a new Atlantic baseball stadium, an Atlantic League baseball stadium, and the development of a doctorate of osteopathic medicine school right down the road at Meredith Health. So we hope that in the future, we'll be able to continue to contribute to that economic development. And finally, I'd like to just note that in June 2025, we will be hosting the Board of Regents. So we look forward to hosting you and welcoming you to the area so you can see the growth that's occurring. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Any questions by any of the regents? Thank you.
Madam Chair, Board of Regents, Chancellor Perman, University Presidents, thank you for the opportunity to give you some information about the University System of Maryland at Southern Maryland. My name is Eileen Abel, and I have served in the role of as Executive Director since December of 2021. I'm glad to share with you today a little bit about who we are and how we serve the community. If you go to the next slide, please. So for those of you who don't know where Southern Maryland is, and it's amazing how many people ask me, well, now wait, are you part of the Eastern Shore? It's like, no, I am not part of the Eastern Shore. We are the little peninsula that is surrounded by the Patuxent River, the Potomac River, and the Bay. It is home of Piscataway and site of some of the earliest settler history, not just in Maryland, but in the United States. What's interesting about the area is our primary occupation down there is the Department of Defense, which is located in St. Mary's County. It's a little bit hard to see on the slide here, but the little blue heart down there is where the center is located. But our service area includes Charles County, Calvert County, and of course, St. Mary's. Despite the high salaries that are attendant to jobs with the DoD on the base in St. Mary's County, we have enormous pockets of financial vulnerability. 34% ALICE rate, 7% poverty rate, and those poverty rates are higher in communities of color. And while we do have a high proportion of PhDs and master's holders in Southern Maryland, those are primarily people who are in education and work at the base and are already incumbent workers. Only 19% of our population holds bachelor's degrees. 30% of the jobs require bachelor's degree as the minimum entry-level credential. So you all understand the mission of education. One of our best ways to address those pockets of poverty and ALICE rates are to get people into those jobs, high wage, high demand careers. If you'll go to the next slide, please. The University System of Maryland at Southern Maryland is both the oldest and the newest of the regional higher ed centers. It had originally reported to MHEC and was primarily a master's and PhD granting location for the knowledge needs Patuxent River Naval Air Station. 2019, it came under the auspices of the USM and came then with a new mission, and that was to grow bachelor's completion programs to meet the occupational needs in the area, as well as to support the University of Maryland College Park Clark School of Engineering's Matrix Lab, which brings together researchers, students, and the DoD to focus on autonomous systems and research. We also have a mission recently acquired to support the Kennedy Krieger Southern Maryland School, which is in a long-term lease in our original building, where they now serve about 30 students who have serious neurological divergences and can't be mainstreamed into major public education. And as the Chancellor told you a few minutes ago, over the last month, we've had 300 eighth graders from St. Mary's County Public Schools on our campus. It reminds me how much admiration I have for middle school teachers and raises the question of whether I was that squirrely in eighth grade, and I'm sure I was. But it's been really wonderful having those students on campus and has given us a lot of lively entertainment. And I can honestly say I'm going to miss them when they go. If you go to the next slide, please. Oops, sorry. Go to the back one. Sorry, I didn't realize you'd already forwarded. Thank you. So world-class education close to home, and it's what we offer at the regional higher ed centers. Our classrooms are all high-tech to allow multiple opportunities and maximum flexibility for students to complete their programs without having to commute. What we also know is that this is some of the best options for students for whom commuting is a hardship, for whom residential campus experience is not possible for financial or personal reasons, and for whom online learning is not a preferred learning modality. You can see that we've had 225 graduates over the last 5 years. Each one of those students will tell you they wouldn't have been able to complete their degree and step into the roles that they wanted to and needed to without access to the Regional Higher Education Center. If you go to the next slide, please. I'm not going to go over this one. You have the opportunity to look at it on your own, but we do have great job growth potential and a great potential to grow these programs. The center is hungry for new programs, and we're looking forward to working with the system schools to bring some of these programs on board. Important growth areas, AI, of course, business, data science, software development, and anything related to computer science. And of course, thinking also ways for us to grow our education programs, since all 3 of our counties are in crisis with their teacher pipeline. The next slide, please. Just a quick slide on what you can do. Continue to support innovative programming from high school to the community colleges to USMSM and for graduate programs to keep students and the workforce local. Our signature program, I just want to give you a quick example. Our signature program is the engineering program that the College of Southern Maryland runs with a transfer program to the University of Maryland College Park. Students have the opportunity to complete the entire mechanical or engineering degree, mechanical or electrical engineering degree on site without having to commute with the combination of different teaching modalities. Many of them apply to the base to be interns, where they get their tuition offset and they also get a small salary. And it means that students can essentially walk into a job at the end of their internship with a bachelor's degree in mechanical or electrical engineering in high demand down there with almost no student debt. What we also know about the program is that about 94% of the students who've gone through that program and work at the base stay working at the base. The base is extremely invested in this program and has provided some support structures at the College of Southern Maryland to help students in this pipeline. And some of the adjunct faculty that teach in the program at our center are support the students who are transferring there as well. It's a great program. We hope to replicate that with multiple areas. Please try to connect us with workforce that you're aware of and philanthropy. We're the only regional higher ed center that right now doesn't have a scholarship program. We just connected with the USM Foundation, so we do have a mechanism now by which to do that. But we would like to be able to offer those opportunities for students. But also, I'm going to ask you to really advocate for the regional higher ed centers. I think you'll hear from all 3 of us that we are an option for students for whom there are no other options, and they love being at our centers for all the reasons Jacob just mentioned: small class sizes, good relationships with teachers, and world-class education. So I thank you for your time, and I'm happy to address any questions you may have.
Any questions for Dr. Abel? Seeing none, thank you. And you're on cleanup.
Good morning, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be here to share with you an update on where we are with our strategic plan at the universities at Shady Grove. I'm going to be building on the great work that my colleagues have just shared as well. I want to begin by thanking all of the regents, Chair Gooden and all the regents, for your support for the work we've been doing, especially the resolution that you passed last year in support of our designation. I want to thank all the presidents for your continued support for the work that we're doing at Shady Grove, the provosts, and a number of groups that have come together to support the work that we're doing. So I want to start off with, I'm not sure if this, I want to start off with, next slide, please, with why. You can go to the next slide. Let's start with the Vision 2030. And the need for transformational change, for greater access, greater affordability, greater alignment with career options and possibilities. And the RHECs are a great asset for the system to help make this transformational change. And our strategic plan at the universities at Shady Grove is all about how we can build that next generation RHEC to take us from a place where we've had some great innovations and great success in reaching students who, if not for the RHECs, would not have received their four-year degree. But how do we scale that? How do we grow that? Greater access, greater affordability, greater alignment with the workforce. Next slide, please. This is what we've been doing at the universities at Shady Grove, and this is an overview of the model that we are building at Shady Grove. First of all, we are really focused on being as student-centered and as equity-centered as we possibly can. Remove as many barriers as possible to transferring into our institutions. We are focusing on talent development as the foundational element of economic development. It is, we believe, the most important driver of economic development today. It is definitely in Montgomery County. And we have built ourselves around industry sectors at the universities at Shady Grove. So all of our degree programs represented by all of our institutions align with key industry sector hubs that do the planning for the pathways. We're pathway focused, and we're trying to connect deeply with the work of the blueprint as well. We are working to be data informed in our planning and our evaluation, our planning for pathways, as well as our evaluation for how programs are doing and how students are doing in their career success. We want the RHEX to be a place of holistic collaboration, not a place where 80 different degree programs come and do their own thing, but a place where university partners come together to work on this challenge of access, affordability, and industry sector alignment for all students. We want Shady Grove to be a place of hallmarked programs, where every program is not only academically excellent, but where students graduate career ready because career readiness is built into what they're doing, where every student has the opportunity for employer-based experiential learning, and where every student's needs are met. We meet them where they are for their support through the program. We want to, and we are working on becoming more sophisticated in how we strategize and reach our programs and our work for graduate students as well as for undergraduate students. At Shady Grove, we're very focused on trying to standardize our business practices. I've told my team we should be gold standard in our business practices so that our partners don't have to worry about how we're managed and run. We can focus on collaboration and the academic work that we're doing together. And finally, we're focused on being, again, an asset and a resource for the system to galvanize change, to help drive this access and affordability mission. Next slide, please. And this is what we're building at the RHEX. We're building pathways. This is our pathway model. It's evolved over the last 10 years. I won't go into detail on it, but we identify phases of a student across the pathway. We identify different learner groups, and we identify the hallmarks of USG programs. And the work of our industry sector hubs is to build effective pathways with our academic partners in this work so that students have a smooth and successful journey towards career success. Next slide, please. So the value add, what are we building together for our academic partners and the system? Well, we hope that there's a system bounce. We hope that what we're doing at the RHEX can be lessons learned that can be taken back to home campuses and applied. We hope that it will be equity and diversity enhancing. We hope that this focus on talent development as a driver of economic development can emerge more powerfully. We're bringing employer insights that can be useful in how we develop degree programs and prepare our students, and enrollment growth, as well as synergies in pedagogy, services, and much more. Next slide, please. We also see a value add that we're building for students, most importantly, right? Academic programs that align with career plans, strengths, interests, and values of every student being fully realized, a smooth journey without a lot of barriers, financial savings and support. We've set out a goal at Shady Grove over the next 10 years. We want every student coming through Shady Grove to graduate debt-free. Right now, we're at about 58%. So our goal is to get to 100% for students. It's a big challenge, but I think we can do that together. And finally, being career ready and student services that meet them where they are. And the last piece of this, next slide, please, is the value add for employers and the state. Employers are desperate for talent that aligns with their needs, talent that stays, talent that grows with them. We do that together at Shady Grove. The industry sector hubs bring the employers into the equation with us for that work. They're fulfilling their talent needs, building on the blueprint. And so we believe that there's a partnership there that can be very beneficial to employers as well as our academic partners and, of course, our students. And we're developing students, graduates who are stakeholders in the new economy and taxpayers in the new economy. The numbers that we have cited in the past are for every graduate with a four-year degree who goes on to be a taxpayer over the next 20 years, $270,000 on average added to the state's tax base. So we think there's a lot of benefit to reaching more students who would not otherwise be able to get a four-year degree. And what we're asking from all of you is your continued support and investment in the RHECs, your continued support for a designation for the next generation RHEC, and support for the resources that we need to do this work together. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Ann. Yeah, Bill?
Thank you for that presentation. I live in Montgomery County in Chevy Chase, have an office in Rockville. And I can remember when the grounds that USG is on was a cornfield. And I can remember Chancellor Kerwin having the excited idea of creating this campus and the concept, and how there were so many skeptics at the time. And I can remember being involved a little bit in the negotiations with the Kozelski family, who owned the cornfield. And the reason I'm mentioning all that history is because over all the years since that has happened, USG has become a presence in Montgomery County that has created a tremendous amount of excitement. And even today, especially today, when I run into people that I know, they know that I'm on the Board of Regents, and they talk about USG and the wonderful things that USG does. And now people know that there are 9 different institutions, all with a presence at your campus. So I just want to say it's a fabulous thing. It was a great idea, and it worked.
Thank you so much.
You?
Yeah, I would just like to give a shout out to all 3 RHECs, and I want to make a couple of comments, and then I have a question. But my comments are, I remind everyone that one of the pillars of our strategic plan as a system is access and affordability. And the access that these campuses provide in the regions that we're talking about are vital. It goes without saying that there are numbers of undergrads who get their degrees that would never, ever have a chance to do that if we didn't have these institutions located where they are and providing the service. So I commend you for the mission that you're doing. I also commend the presidents and the provosts who are supporting these schools with the programs, and ask that you have an open mind and listen to the needs as we grow and try to grow these institutions in their places, because they're just really, really, really important. Second comment I would make, just following up on Jacob, next year's June meeting, for those of us who've been on this board, the Frostburg State Thursday evening event is legendary in terms of the train ride that it provides. But I will tell you, we're going to try to usurp that next June by, if the South Atlantic League schedules properly, we're going to have our Thursday evening event at the stadium for a baseball game or for our minor league franchise. So hopefully that might be an incentive to come west and see us at that time. The last thing, I just have a question. And last week I was in our meeting with our USMH Board of Advisors, and the question came up again about the proper accounting for the students that are going to our institutions here. And I just asked Chancellor Perman, and I know Vice Chancellor Herbst are working on improving, I don't know what the right word is, how we account for the students that are going to these institutions, primarily so that people really recognize the impact that we're having, and specifically that the legislature realizes the impact that these institutions are having, so we can lessen some of maybe the questions or skeptics about whether there's a need. I think that's really, really important. And that question came up by the local community leaders to ensure that what's happening in Hagerstown, I'm sure it's the same in both places, that there's proper credit being assigned to the students that are involved. So thank you.
We look forward to welcoming everyone in November as well to the Regents meeting in November at Shady Grove. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, this brings us to the end of the public session. It's been a weighty agenda today with many substantive topics. I want to start by thanking President Morales Wilhelm, and I got that right this time, and your entire team for hosting us. It was a wonderful 2 days here, and the only sad note that I have is that, we were told last night not to eat tuna. And It's one of my favorites. And so that was a little sad, but we learned a lot yesterday in the outing. Every year, as a system and as institutions, we have our challenges. We will address them as we always have. We'll address them together as a team, and we'll remember on what's important. Our focus has to be on what Hugh just said. Our focus is on access and affordability for our students so that they're educated in a quality and safe environment. And so as we begin this year, we'll have many new challenges. We will address them together. And I'm hoping that together we'll work through them and be here next year to say, we've got many new challenges. And so, and me and the microphone. The Open Meetings Act permits public bodies to close their meetings to the public in circumstances outlined in 3-305 of the Act and to carry out administrative functions exempted by 3-103 of the Act. The Board of Regents will now vote to reconvene in closed session. The agenda for the public meeting today includes a written statement with a citation of the legal authority and reasons for closing the meeting and a listing of the topics to be discussed. The statement has been provided to the Regents and is posted on the USM's website. Do I have a motion to close? Second, all in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the meeting is closed, and the closed meeting will start at noon.
Second floor. All familiar with?